For some 40 years, hundreds, perhaps thousands of young women have been drugged, raped and beaten across dozens of UK cities by men belonging to so-called grooming gangs.
They're gangs of men who groom young teenage girls and abuse them for sex and end up, in some cases, imprisoning them and passing them around lots of other guys and lots of other people, even selling them for sex. And these girls get abused for many years.
The problem not only continues, it's getting worse. December 2020, British authorities charged 32 men in a grooming gang with 200 sexual exploitation offenses against 8 girls, some as young as 13.
Arrests and prosecutions have happened around 40 different cities across the country. In one or two cities, we know there's at least 1,000 victims. So that's many thousands of victims, and many of these victims have been raped and abused by more than one abuser as well. So the scale of the problem is massive.
Most perpetrators convicted so far are reportedly Muslim. The majority of their victims are white.
My story started over 20 years ago. I was targeted in my late teens.
At the time, Ella Hill, not her real name, was living in Rotherham, north of London, when targeted by a Pakistani Muslim grooming gang and
raped, beaten, strangled, suffocated, tortured, almost drowned to death, suffocated to death, really, really brutally harmed, covered in bruises.
Hill said it was made clear to her by her attackers that because she was white, a non-Muslim, a virgin, and didn't dress modestly, that she deserved to be punished. She was reportedly raped over 100 times and endured what she says was religiously sanctioned sexual violence and torture.
People need to hear it from survivors that these are racially and religiously aggravated crimes. That when I was being beaten, I was being called a white slag, a white whore, a white that over and over again, the references to my whiteness was always at the forefront of my perpetrator's mind, and that was always linked in with religion and his idea of what a good Muslim was and a bad non-Muslim was.
She escaped a year later, becoming part of the UK's largest ever child sexual abuse investigation. More than 20 years later, these same assaults in European cities are only getting worse.
The sexual violence is increasing because of the number of immigrant men from Muslim-majority countries who are responsible for most of these, not all of them, but for most of these.
In her new book, Prey, Somali-born women's rights activist Ayan Hirsi Ali argues that immigration and Islam are major factors threatening women's safety. She documents how a surge of migrants coming to Europe from Muslim-majority countries has led to a spike in rapes, sexual harassment cases, and other violence against native white women.
There are groups of men, most of them immigrant, who engage in this behavior of catcalling, calling them whores, trying to touch them, trying to grope them. Sometimes these men act in groups and they start hunting, treating the women like prey and start assaulting them.
At the core, Ali says, is an Islamic view that European women are neither pure nor modest, are too free and therefore immoral, deserving severe punishment.
When they come to countries where women are free and go about their business as they please, these men are shell-shocked and start to behave really badly.
Tim Dieppe, with the UK's Christian Concern, says some European governments are in denial, refusing to admit the problem is partly linked to immigration and Islam.
People are afraid to tackle this, afraid to talk about it because they don't want to be called racist. And that means that we're sacrificing young girls on the altar of political correctness.
Dieppe points to a recent UK government report which failed to mention the role Islam may have played in fueling some of the grooming gangs.
There are people in the government and the civil service in particular who just didn't want to go down that route. And the excuse they used was, we've not got enough data a lot of the time. But there is evidence and from victims and others that Islam has played a role.
Hill says she went to the police 5 times, yet they never did anything. She believes authorities back then were scared to take action for fear of triggering unrest in the Muslim community.
This is why I feel compelled to talk about what's happened and what is still happening.
As a refugee, Ali says she's not against immigration. She insists, however, European governments must have effective programs to help integrate and assimilate new migrant arrivals.
If we don't do that, we're going to empower the far right, the Russian misinformation agents, and the radical Islamists.
Since her attack, Hill has spent several years speaking out on behalf of victims of sexual exploitation. It hasn't been easy. She's been labeled a racist for reporting the abuse and threatened by far-left groups like Antifa because she's white.
I get called a Nazi, I get called a fascist, I get called a bigot, I get called an enemy of Islam, which is all lies. I'm not any of those things at all.
Hill is a Christian and says her faith is what keeps her grounded and strong.
My very strong belief is love your enemy. So love your enemy, bless those who curse you, and do good to those who spitefully use you. That is what I fall back on.
George Thomas, CBN News.